What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Today we're going to start getting back into the record predictions, going over the schedule, looking at what games are easier for the Lions, what games are going to be more difficult, what I think the record is going to turn out, and how I think that the Lions are going to do in each respective matchup in the 2020 season. But before we do get into it, if you are new to the channel and are enjoying this kind of content, consider liking the video, sharing it with a Lions or an NFL fan, and subscribing to the YouTube channel. I appreciate everybody that does so, everybody that helps me out, makes my day, and I'm very appreciative to everybody that chooses to support me on this channel. And then last night we did hit 100 subs, which was one of my goals when I started this channel. Shout out to Luke G for, helping me get there. A lot of this was because of him. Obviously, I'd still be doing YouTube at this point, but I would be nowhere near 100 subs at this point if he had not been gracious enough to not only find my content, but then choose to, or decide that it was good enough to, shout out, invite me on the roundtable, help me get my subs up a little faster. So for that, I want to thank Luke G personally. I'm pretty sure that you're watching this video, and if you are, then just thank you from the bottom of my heart for deciding to help me out. That was amazing, and I will forever be grateful for that. But with all that out of the way, let's get right into what y'all came for, the Week 8 matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. So obviously, the Detroit Lions are coming back from the road in Atlanta. Tough loss in hand. It was a fantastic game, absolute shootout. But the combination of Matt Ryan and Todd Gurley and Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and Hayden Hurst just, overpowered the Lions. The Lions scratched and clawed their way all the way through the game, but unfortunately, the Atlanta Falcons were able to come out on top in last week's matchup. So they come home to Detroit. 4-2, not a horrible record, but not necessarily in that elite tier, I would say. They're probably still first in the North, but I would assume at this point somebody's starting to gain on them. 4-2 is good, but not great. And, they're coming in to play the Indianapolis Colts. Now, while we haven't played the Indianapolis Colts in a few years, I believe the last time we played them was 2017, where we did get a win. We did play their starting quarterback last year, who was Phillip Rivers. Now, Phillip Rivers last year in Detroit, playing for the LA Chargers, was 21 for 36, threw for 293 yards and 1 interception. The Detroit defense did not allow him to throw a touchdown, and I believe they only gave up 2 touchdowns on the day. So, they had a very good game against Phillip Rivers. Last time they played him, they were able to pretty much shut him down. At least they were able to keep him out of the end zone for the entirety of the game, which is always a good thing for your defense. Phillip Rivers is not the same quarterback that he used to be. He's throwing more interceptions. He's throwing less touchdowns. He's just not the same guy that even a year or two ago that, took the Chargers to the AFC conference or AFC divisional round. It's not the same guy that can lead the Chargers to a 11-5, 12-4 record and be legitimate contenders anymore unless they have an absolutely amazing roster around him. Looking at the two rosters, just to kind of look at, some of the weapons that Phillip Rivers is working with in LA and what he will be working with in Indy. Last year with the Chargers, he had 2 1,000-yard receivers. He had a running back that almost had 1,000 yards receiving and had 1,500 total yards. He had 1,500 scrimmage yards. He had a tight end with over 650 yards in the air. He had so many weapons in LA. And he's going to Indianapolis, where they're not horrible when it comes to weapons and skill positions, but they're nowhere near what the LA Chargers were. Last year, the Indianapolis Colts top wide receiver had 600 yards. Their running back, Marlon Mack, did have 1,000 yards on the ground, which is a good thing. And I think that's going to be a strong suit for the Colts next year, but I will get into that in a couple minutes. And then they lost one of their top tight ends in Eric Ebron, which, is one of their key losses. Speaking of key losses for both teams, I think this game is going to be an absolute slugfest. I think it's going to be very similar to what we see in Chicago in Week 1. A lot of running the ball, a lot of probably short yardage, 3-5 yard runs, just grind out on the ground, try to run out the clock, get a lead, hold that lead, and try to drain as much clock as possible. But I don't think the Colts have quite the defense that the Bears have, but I think that it's going to be a similar philosophy as far as offensive decision making. Now, some key losses for us as far as the run game is going to be Snacks Harrison, Ashawn Robinson, and Graham Glasgow. Obviously, two of those guys were run stoppers for us last year, starters for us last year that were supposed to stop the run. Didn't do a fantastic job at it, but they were obviously NFL players. Damon Snacks Harrison used to be very good, was not quite the player he was 2 years ago when we traded for him. And then Graham Glasgow was a starting offensive lineman who, if we cannot find a good replacement for, we're going to have trouble running the ball as efficiently, because Graham Glasgow was a very good guard for us in Detroit. And if we can't find a guy that can push the pile like he did, then we're going to have a more difficult time running the football than if he were still in Detroit. But I've talked about them a lot. I always kind of going back to the same players as on the Detroit side of the ball. So moving over to the Colts side, they lost Eric Ebron, as I mentioned earlier, their top tight end, who they paid a lot of money to. I think he led the league led the NFL in touchdown receptions a few years ago. Made the Pro Bowl a couple times with Indianapolis. They lost Pierre Desir, who was a starting cornerback for them last year. I believe he had 3 interceptions. He was maybe not an elite cornerback in the NFL, but he's very serviceable. Definitely not a liability. This was a guy before we signed Trufant that I was thinking maybe the Lions would bring in on a cheap contract. This guy is very underrated. He is a good cornerback and isn't necessarily the biggest name. And then they lost Devin Funchess last year, who I think they signed to a 1-year deal last offseason. And he didn't play for them a whole lot. Devin Funchess, as I said in the Green Bay game, is not the best wide receiver. He's not a very good receiver in the NFL, but he's an okay second option, third option for, his contract and what he's worth. Looking at key additions, as far as the run game that's going to help us, I said that Danny Shelton, Nick Williams, and Jamie Collins were, impact players that are going to have impact on this game that the Lions brought in this offseason. Obviously, Shelton and Williams are both defensive tackles, guys that are supposed to stop the run, get initial pressure to kind of blow stuff up in the backfield when they try to run the ball. And then Jamie Collins needs to be able to clean stuff up. If Shelton can draw double teams, then that leaves Collins open. He, leaves the gap open for Collins to shoot that and get a tackle for loss on Marlon Mack or Jonathan Taylor. Speaking of Jonathan Taylor, that is one of their good additions. Obviously, they drafted him early in the draft, second round. He's a very good running back. He had back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons at Wisconsin. Absolute bell cow for them. He's going to be a workhorse. He's going to get a lot of carries, and he's arguably the best pure runner in the draft. His only concerns were fumbling issues at Wisconsin and the fact that he took so many carries that his body might be worn out and he might not be as durable as guys like DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins or even Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Obviously, they brought in Phillip Rivers from the LA Chargers, who I have talked about and I will talk about a little bit later. As I said, not quite the same quarterback that he was a couple of years ago, but still a serviceable quarterback in the NFL, still better than Jacoby Brissett was last year. And then the final player that they brought in was Xavier Rhodes, a guy that used to be an elite cornerback in the NFL, used to be up in that, top 5, top 3 conversation, and just his play absolutely dropped last year, absolutely was nowhere near what, a lot of people expect out of him. And he did make the Pro Bowl, but you guys know how I feel about the Pro Bowl on this channel. It's more of a popularity contest. You go off your big name, and he has a big name because he used to be good, but last year his production dropped significantly, and he was nowhere. He was probably one of the worst starting cornerbacks in the NFL last year. So I'm not super scared about him. Every time we play, Marvin Jones seems to have a highlight catch against him, and Marvin Jones kind of owns that rivalry, at least as of recent years. As far as key matchups, I think that, a key matchup on the Colts offensive side, their offense against the Detroit defense is going to be the Colts running backs versus our run defense. As I said, I think that they're going to lean on the run game a ton this year, not only because Phillip Rivers is not the quarterback that he once was. He's a older, kind of slower. He seems to be making worse decisions than he was a couple of years ago, forcing the ball more than he was a couple of years ago. I think they're going to try to take it out of his hands as much as possible, run the ball as much as possible, have faith in your Jonathan Taylors and your Marlon Macks, that they can get you first downs, that they can bleed the clock, that they can run out everything, and just get you a win without Phillip Rivers having to do anything spectacular. And I think that our run defense is going to have a real challenge this week. I think they're going to need to step up to the plate. I think that they're going to need to have a fantastic game if they want to contain that run game, or the Lions offense is going to have to get out to a huge lead early so that they are forced to throw the ball more. And then on the flip side of that, I think that a good matchup for the Lions offense is going to be our wide receivers versus a very, talent lacking is the right word, right phrase, secondary for the Colts. They have Malik Hooker, who I think is a very good safety from Ohio State, but outside of that, their cornerbacks and their other safety aren't very good. Obviously, they signed Xavier Rhodes, who I already mentioned. They have Kenny Moore, who is an okay player, but I wouldn't even really put him in that second level. Like he probably wouldn't start for the Detroit Lions, and they have a pretty good secondary, but I don't think Kenny Moore is a very good. Well, I don't think he is a notable cornerback to really avoid. And then Rock Ya-Sin was a cornerback that was drafted last year, not the past draft, but last year's draft, and I think that he can definitely take a big step forward, but it's yet to be seen. And I think that just the pure amount of talent in Galladay and Marvin Jones and Amendola and Hall and Allison, all those guys are just going to be able to overpower that secondary. And I think that Stafford's going to have a big day again. But overall, as far as the outcome of the game, I think the Lions are going to win by, one score. I think that they're going to be ahead most of the game. I think that by the end of the first quarter, they'll be up by double-digit points just because the pure amount of receiving talent. I think that they're going to come out throwing the ball early, try to get up as fast as possible so that they make the Chargers throw the ball more, put it in Phillip Rivers' hands as much as possible. And then I think after the first quarter, they kind of control the tempo. They control the game. They run the clock as much as possible. And I think the Colts try to run the ball, but I just think that they're going to be in a situation where eventually they're going to have to throw the ball. And when they throw the ball, I think that the Lions secondary is good enough to make Phillip Rivers pay. And I don't think that the wide receivers are good enough in Indianapolis to bail him out like they did last year in Detroit with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So I think the Lions win this game. I think they go 5-2. They're looking really, really strong in the NFC North. They're leading the NFC North at this point. They have been leading it since week 1. 5-2 is a very, very good record to have. I don't know who they play in week 9, but they're going into that contest feeling very confident that they can come into anybody's house on any given Sunday and win a football game because they have just been dominating a majority of their games, and they are a very good football team this year. But that is my opinion. That is what I think is going to happen in week 8 against the Indianapolis Colts. If you disagree, if you think the Colts are going to pull this out, if you see something on the Colts roster that I missed that you think is going to be the game changer, the deciding factor in that game, please feel free to let me know either in the comments below, or you could follow me on Instagram at rightorwrong33. And share your comments, share your opinions there. If you haven't followed that, you definitely should, because you guys can ask me questions. We could talk football. I can ask you guys questions, anything like that. So if you want to do that, feel free to go follow that. Link will be in the description to that, to my Instagram. But with that being said, that is all I have for you today. If there is Lions news, I will obviously make a video informing every single person that watches the video. But until then, have an absolutely fantastic day. That is all I have for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching.